During Frostbridge's worst blizzard, a starving German shepherd scratched 3 times at an old veteran's door. Ephraim Dorsey had lost his son, his savings, and nearly all hope, but he still opened it. The dog wore no name, only a rusted tag marked 09. When the storm passed, Ephraim learned the dog had escaped from a cruel training academy. Now the whole town wanted the truth buried, and Bastion might be declared too dangerous to live. Could one wounded veteran save a dog taught to survive through fear? Tell us where you're watching from, then like the video and subscribe for more veteran and dog stories. By late afternoon, Frostbridge had disappeared. The hills were still there, and so were the maple woods, the stone barns, and the narrow road that curled around Emberglass Lake. But the storm had erased their edges. Snow fell sideways through the darkening sky, filling ditches, swallowing fences, and pressing against windows as though winter had grown hands. The power failed shortly after 4. Ephraim Dorsey did not look up when the lights went out. He had expected it. Men who had spent part of their lives waiting for bad things learned not to be surprised when they arrived on schedule. He set down his screwdriver, struck a match, and lit the oil lamp on the kitchen table. Its small flame revealed a modest room worn smooth by years of use. The wooden cabinets leaned slightly away from the wall. A row of tin cups hung over the sink. Near the back door, 2 old towels had been pushed against the gap beneath the frame to keep out the wind. The fire in the stove gave more sound than heat. Ephraim added 1 short piece of split maple and watched the flames catch. That left 11 pieces. 12, if he counted the crooked one he had been saving, because it fit perfectly beneath the loose leg of the workbench. He had started the morning with nearly twice that amount. Before the first heavy snow began, he had loaded half his dry firewood into the back of his truck and driven it to Mildred Pike's house. Mildred was 81, lived alone, and possessed a furnace that had chosen the coldest week in 40 years to make its final political statement. She had stood on her porch in 2 sweaters and told him she could manage. Ephraim had carried the wood inside anyway. "You'll need it more than I will," she had protested. "That is true," he had said. Mildred had stared at him, uncertain whether he was joking. He had been partly. Now the temperature inside his cabin continued to fall, and the old walls creaked beneath each violent gust from the lake. Ephraim pulled his green military-style coat tighter around his shoulders. The fabric was faded at the elbows and dusty along the seams. A worn U.S. veteran patch sat above the left pocket, while an aging American flag remained stitched to the right sleeve. Beneath the coat, his blue-gray flannel shirt was buttoned to the throat. At 75, Ephraim was still broad across the shoulders, though age and grief had carved the rest of him down. Deep wrinkles crossed his forehead and ran beside his cheeks. His skin held the weathered brown of a man who had spent more hours beneath open sky than beneath polite ceilings. His short silver-white hair was untidy at the crown. A neatly trimmed mustache curved down at the corners of his mouth, giving him the appearance of a stern old mechanic even when he was trying to be kind. He bent over the broken radio on the table. Its casing had been opened, exposing wires, a cracked circuit board, and 1 stubborn connection that refused to hold. Ephraim worked slowly, the fingers of his left hand steady while the right stiffened in the cold. The radio belonged to Josiah Peck at the community station. Ephraim had promised to repair it before the next weather emergency. The weather emergency had arrived before the repair. "That shows poor cooperation," he muttered to the radio. The storm offered no apology. On the shelf across from him stood a framed photograph he had turned slightly toward the wall that morning. He did not need to look at it to know what it showed. Daniel, at 32, standing beside Emberglass Lake with a fishing rod in one hand and a grin too large for the trout hanging from the other. His son had always smiled, as though the world had just told him a private joke. This date had once belonged to that smile. Then it became the date of a diagnosis. Each year, Ephraim pretended not to remember. He never marked it on a calendar. He did not visit the cemetery. He did not call anyone. He repaired things. The radio crackled when he touched two wires together. For half a second, a distant voice broke through the static. Historic accumulation across northern counties. Then silence returned. Ephraim adjusted the connection. Outside, Emberglass Lake groaned. The sound traveled beneath the storm, deep and slow, like something enormous shifting in its sleep. The ice had thickened during the first cold weeks of winter, but pressure still moved underneath it, opening invisible fractures beneath the snow. The windows trembled in their frames. Ephraim glanced toward the clock. 11:47. He considered adding another piece of wood to the stove and decided against it. Then came the scratching, 3 quick strokes against the front door. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Ephraim lifted his head. The wind rushed around the cabin, shaking the porch rail. A branch could have dragged across the wood. Ice might have fallen from the roof. He waited. Nothing. He returned his eyes to the radio. Scrape, scrape, scrape. This time the sound was lower, not at the height of a person's hand. Ephraim's chair moved back without noise. His body had slowed over the years, but certain habits remained quicker than thought. He scanned the window, the narrow hall, the dark shape of the back door. His eyes measured the room before he stood. No headlights showed through the snow. No voice called for help. Only the wind, and beneath it, something breathing close to the threshold. Ephraim picked up the oil lamp. His right knee objected as he crossed the room. The old injury always grew louder in cold weather, as if it wished to participate in every storm personally. At the door, he stopped. A third set of scratches came from outside. They were weaker now. Ephraim slid the bolt back and opened the door against the pressure of the wind. Snow burst into the room. For a moment he saw nothing beyond the white. Then the lamp flame steadied behind his hand, and a shape emerged at the edge of the porch. A German shepherd stood, or tried to stand, beneath a coat of snow and ice. The dog was large, though hunger had hollowed him into sharp lines. His black and copper fur clung to his ribs. One ear stood upright, while the other, torn near the tip, leaned beneath a crust of frozen snow. Blood stained the fur around his paws. A short length of chain hung from his collar and dragged across the boards. The dog's eyes were dark amber. They did not beg. They searched. The doorway, Ephraim's hands, the room behind him, the window near the stove. Even on the edge of collapse, the animal was measuring danger. Ephraim lowered the lamp slightly. "Well," he said, because silence seemed too cruel, "you have chosen a poor hotel." The dog's front paw moved. It dragged once against the doorframe. Then his legs folded. He struck the porch without a sound. Ephraim set the lamp inside and knelt. Pain shot through his right knee, hard enough to darken the edges of his vision. He ignored it and placed 2 fingers near the dog's neck. A pulse beat there, fast, thin, but present. The animal's eyes opened again. When Ephraim reached toward the collar, the dog flattened himself against the boards. His lips did not lift, but every muscle locked. Ephraim stopped. "All right," he said. "No hands near the neck." The dog watched him. Ephraim could not lift him. Even in that starved condition, the shepherd was too heavy, and Ephraim knew exactly what would happen if his knee failed beneath both their weight. He went inside, retrieved the old wool army blanket from the back of a chair, and spread it beside the dog. Moving inch by inch, he worked the blanket under the animal's body. The shepherd flinched when the fabric touched his injured hind leg, but did not bite. "That makes one of us being sensible," Ephraim murmured. He gripped the corners and pulled. The blanket slid across the porch, over the threshold, and into the cabin. Ephraim moved backward, using his good leg and the strength left in his shoulders. By the time the dog was beside the stove, sweat had gathered beneath his coat despite the cold. He closed the door, dropped the bolt, and stood breathing heavily. The dog tried to rise. His paws slipped on the floorboards. Even then, instead of moving toward the fire, he dragged himself sideways until his back touched the wall, and he could see both Ephraim and the front door. Ephraim watched him for several seconds. That was not the instinct of a lost pet searching for warmth. That was training. Or fear polished until it looked like training. He placed a shallow bowl of water several feet away and stepped back. The dog stared at it. His tongue touched the edge of his mouth, but he did not move. Ephraim turned his back. Only then did he hear the first quiet lapse. The sound lasted 4 seconds before stopping. The dog lifted his head and checked the room again. Ephraim's jaw tightened. He removed his gloves and crouched at a careful distance. Beneath the frozen fur around the neck, pale scars formed an uneven ring. Some were old and smooth, others had healed thickly. Something had been tightened there many times. Hanging beneath the collar was a rectangular metal tag. Ephraim waited until the dog's eyes shifted toward the door, then leaned close enough to read it without touching. There was no name, no address, only 2 stamped digits. The dog noticed his attention and pulled his chin down over the tag. "Fine," Ephraim said. "Keep your secrets." The shepherd's body began to shake, not the ordinary shiver of cold. This came in waves, starting in the shoulders and passing through the ribs. Ephraim moved to the shelf above the sink and took down the battery-powered field radio he used when the phone lines failed. It took 3 attempts to reach Gwen Talbot. Her voice arrived beneath layers of static. "Ephraim, you still have a roof?" "Most of one." "That was not the question." "I have an animal here." There was a pause. "What kind?" "German Shepherd. Male, I think. Severe exposure. Starved. Bleeding paws. Old injury to the right rear leg." Gwen's tone changed immediately. She had spent most of her life as a veterinary nurse, and now coordinated winter rescue efforts whenever Frostbridge became inaccessible. "Is he conscious?" "Yes." "Responsive?" "Suspicious." "That may be what's keeping him alive. Listen carefully. Warm him slowly. No direct heat against the body. Small amounts of water. Do not give him a full meal." Ephraim looked at the dog's ribs. "He appears to disagree with that last part." "He can file a complaint after he survives. Too much food could kill him. Check his gums if he allows it. Pink is good. White or gray is bad. Do not manipulate the back leg." "When can you get here?" Static filled the line. "Road crews cannot clear the lake route tonight," Gwen said. "Maybe tomorrow, maybe the day after, depending on the drifts." The dog's eyes remained fixed on Ephraim. "Understood. And Ephraim?" "Yes? Do not give him your entire dinner." "I have never been accused of generosity." Gwen gave a short laugh. "That lie needs repairs worse than your roof." The connection failed. Ephraim set the radio down. He soaked a small amount of dried meat in warm water, broke it into pieces no larger than his thumb, and placed them in a tin dish. Again the dog would not approach until Ephraim moved away. Again he ate only a little before stopping to inspect the doorway. That night Ephraim did not return to his bedroom. He placed a chair near the front door and covered himself with his coat. The dog remained against the wall, positioned between Ephraim and the entrance. Neither of them truly slept. By the second day, snow had climbed halfway up the windows. Gwen radioed twice. Rescue vehicles had reached the southern road but could not pass a fallen spruce near the lake. Ephraim continued with water, warmth, and tiny meals. The shepherd allowed him to clean one paw with saline, but when Ephraim lifted a cloth toward his neck, the dog collapsed flat against the floor. Ephraim lowered his hand. He felt something tighten beneath his ribs, not anger exactly, but a cold recognition. He had seen men react that way, men who could walk through gunfire but flinched when a door closed too sharply behind them. The storm worsened after sunset. Wind struck the north wall with enough force to knock a tin plate from its hook. The shepherd rose instantly, though his injured leg barely held him. A violent metallic bang came from above. One of the roof sheets tore loose and began slamming against the rafters. Ephraim pushed himself from the chair. Before he took 2 steps, the dog moved in front of him. The shepherd planted himself between Ephraim and the sound, shoulders lowered, head forward. His legs trembled, his ribs heaved. He had almost no strength left. Still he stood guard. Then his injured leg folded, and he fell against Ephraim's boots. Ephraim looked down at the animal. "You fool," he whispered. The words held no anger. He lowered himself painfully to the floor and rested one hand beside the dog, not on him, merely close enough that the animal could choose the distance. After a long moment, the shepherd's nose touched his knuckles. A memory surfaced. 3 weeks earlier, Ephraim had driven to Wintercrest Canine Academy to repair a failing generator. The main technician had been delayed, and Wintercrest needed power for its heated kennels before another cold front arrived. The property had looked respectable from the road: clean fences, fresh paint, a stone sign, and neat rows of buildings beyond the trees. Near the rear generator shed, Ephraim had heard a chain drag. A German shepherd stood behind a wire enclosure. Under freezing rain, the dog had been thin even then. One ear was torn. An employee in a black jacket had told Ephraim not to approach. "Behavioral case," the man had said. "He has to earn water outside scheduled periods." Ephraim had looked at him. The employee had looked away first. Later, while carrying tools back to the truck, Ephraim had filled a maintenance bucket and left it near the fence. He had not called the dog. He had not reached through the wire. He had only set down the water and walked away. Now, in the dim light of the cabin, Ephraim studied the torn ear, the scarred neck, and the metal tag stamped 09. The dog had not crossed the storm by chance. He had remembered the smell of oil and cedar on Ephraim's coat. The low voice beside the fence, the faded truck that had carried the one man who gave him water without asking for obedience first. Outside, the roof continued to groan. Inside, the dog's breathing gradually slowed. Ephraim remained on the floor beside him, his hand resting on the boards. He had believed the animal came to his door because it had nowhere else to go. The truth was quieter and somehow heavier. The dog had chosen where to go. And through the white storm, it had chosen him. For the next 2 days, the storm held Frostbridge in a white fist. Snow pressed against the lower windows of Ephraim's cabin until daylight entered only through the upper panes. The road around Emberglass Lake vanished beneath drifting banks, and the wind moved across the roof with the long, steady pressure of a hand testing every weak board. Inside, time was measured differently. A spoonful of food, 10 minutes of rest, a check of the fire, a glance toward the shepherd breathing near the wall. Gwen Talbot called over the field radio every few hours when the signal allowed it. Her instructions came through static, practical, and unsentimental. "Small portions," she reminded him. "His body has been starving long enough that too much kindness at once could be another injury." Ephraim looked at the shallow tin dish in his hand. It contained softened meat, warm water, and less food than he would have given a healthy dog for a snack. "He disagrees with your medical philosophy." "Most patients do." The line crackled. "Has he vomited?" "No." "Gums?" "Pale pink." "Breathing?" Steady, unless I move too quickly. Then stop moving like a guilty burglar. Ephraim looked down at his right knee. That is my natural speed now. Gwen laughed once before the storm swallowed the connection. The dog still had no name. Ephraim called him 9, because a person needed some word to place between silence and attention. The animal did not acknowledge it. He did not turn his head, twitch an ear, or offer even the smallest sign that the number belonged to him. Perhaps it never had. 9 ate only when Ephraim stood several feet away. If the old man remained near the bowl, the shepherd would stare at the food until his whole body shook with hunger, yet he would not lower his head. Ephraim learned to place the dish on the floor and turn toward the stove. He could hear each cautious bite behind him. The dog never finished everything. Even starving, he left a portion untouched, then moved back to the wall where he could see both doors. It was not restraint. It was preparation. Animals that believed food would return ate differently from animals that expected each meal to be the last thing someone could take from them. Ephraim did not speak this thought aloud. He had known men who slept with bread in their pockets long after they had returned somewhere safe. On the second morning, he tried cleaning the dog's left front paw. He approached from the side, keeping his movements low and visible. 9 watched the cloth in Ephraim's hand, but did not retreat. His amber eyes moved from the cloth to the man's face and back again. "That is saline," Ephraim said. "Not poison, not that poison generally comes with an explanation." 9 allowed the cloth to touch the cracked pad. His body remained rigid, but he did not pull away. Ephraim cleaned away dried blood and grit. Beneath the dirt, the skin was split, but not deeply infected. "Good," he murmured. The word changed something. 9's ears shifted backward. His head dropped, and his shoulders tightened, as though praise had once been followed by pain. Ephraim stopped immediately. He set the cloth down and moved away. The shepherd remained frozen for several seconds before releasing a breath. That evening, a metal spoon slipped from Ephraim's hand. It struck the floor with a bright, sharp clang. 9 came upright so fast his injured hind leg folded beneath him. He scrambled backward, claws scraping the boards until his spine hit the wall. Ephraim did not move toward him. The dog's lips lifted. A growl formed deep in his chest, more terror than warning. "All right," Ephraim said quietly. "The spoon has been defeated." 9 stared at him. Ephraim picked up the spoon slowly, placed it on the table, then returned to his chair as if nothing unusual had happened. The growl faded. It was tempting to offer comfort, to cross the room, kneel, and prove that no harm would follow. But comfort given without permission could still feel like capture. Ephraim had learned that lesson too late with Daniel. During the final months of his son's illness, he had filled every silence with plans. Another specialist, another trial, another hospital in another state. He had spoken of percentages and travel arrangements while Daniel sat beneath thin blankets, listening with the exhausted patience of a man who loved his father too much to tell him that hope had become another demand. Ephraim had believed action was love. Sometimes it was. Sometimes love was staying still enough to hear no. The next afternoon he carried a small hammer from the workbench to repair the loose hinge on a cabinet. The moment he raised it, 9 pressed himself flat against the wall, urine spread beneath his hindquarters. The dog did not growl this time. He simply disappeared inside his own body, eyes open but distant, waiting for what he believed would come next. Ephraim's hand lowered. The hammer suddenly felt heavier than iron. He placed it on the floor. 9 did not move. Ephraim sat down where he stood, his back against the cabinet. His knee complained, but he ignored it. He did not say, "You are safe." The room had not yet earned that sentence. He waited. The stove ticked softly as its metal cooled. Wind whispered along the eaves. Somewhere beneath the snow, the frozen lake shifted with a deep, distant groan. Nine's breathing slowed by degrees. After several minutes, his eyes found Ephraim again. The old man remained seated, empty-handed. "That was a hammer," Ephraim said. "Poor manners, no judgment." Nine blinked. It was the first response Ephraim had received from anything he had said. He stayed on the floor until the dog shifted one paw forward. Nothing more happened. Nothing needed. To that night, Ephraim moved the chair closer to the stove, but left a wide path to both doors. Nine watched him arrange the blankets, then lowered himself on the other side of the room. Ephraim reached into the pocket of his coat and drew out the old steel watch that had belonged to Daniel. The face no longer kept proper time. A crescent-shaped crack crossed the glass, and the back bore the words Daniel had once chosen for an engraving, "Keep showing up." Daniel had given it to him after Ephraim missed a birthday dinner because he had been fixing a stranded neighbor's truck. "You are always showing up for somebody," Daniel had said. "Try making it on time occasionally." At the time, Ephraim had laughed. Now he ran his thumb across the words. Nine watched the movement. "My son hated hospitals," Ephraim said. The shepherd's ears turned slightly toward him. "He hated people calling him brave. Said it was what they called you when they had nothing useful to offer." Ephraim paused. The words came more easily in the dark, perhaps because the dog could not interrupt or forgive him. "The doctors gave us choices, then fewer choices, then choices that were mostly different ways of being afraid." Nine rested his chin on the floor. "I sold the house in town, the boat, most of what I had put away. Daniel said not to spend the last of it on another treatment." Ephraim stared at the damaged watch. "I told him I knew better." The confession sat between them. Outside, snow rattled against the window like dry seeds. "The treatment did not work," he continued. "He knew it would not. Maybe I knew too." Nine's amber eyes remained open. Ephraim had told himself for years that he had done everything possible. People used that sentence as comfort. You did everything you could. But there had been a difference between doing everything for Daniel and doing everything to prevent himself from accepting Daniel's choice. The watch clicked faintly. It had not done that in months. Ephraim looked down, surprised, but the second hand had not moved. The sound had come from the dog's tag touching the floor as Nine shifted closer. Only a few inches. Still, it was the first time he had chosen to reduce the distance between them. Ephraim closed his hand around the watch. "I failed him," he said. Nine did not offer absolution. He did not place a paw on the old man's knee or perform some miracle of perfect understanding. He simply stayed. By the third evening, the storm began losing its anger. The snow still fell, but the wind no longer struck the cabin from every direction. The silence between gusts grew longer. Nine had gained enough strength to stand for several minutes at a time. His right hind leg remained stiff and unreliable, yet he insisted on following Ephraim's movements with his eyes. Ephraim tried names. Major, no response. Copper, nothing. Lincoln. Nine looked toward the stove, which Ephraim took as criticism. Fair, he said. Too much responsibility. He tried Ash, Morse, and Calder. The dog ignored every one. When Ephraim called him Nine, he received the same absence. The number was attached to the collar, not the animal. Near dawn on the fourth day, a strong gust struck the rear of the cabin. The back door shuddered. Ephraim looked up from the stove just as the upper hinge tore free from the softened wood. The door burst inward. Snow and cold air rushed across the kitchen. A hanging pan swung from its hook, and the lamp flame bent nearly flat. Ephraim lunged for the door, but his right knee buckled. He caught the edge of the table before falling. 9 moved first. The shepherd staggered across the floor and drove his shoulder against the open door. His paws slid backward over the boards, injured leg shaking violently, but his weight slowed the wind enough for Ephraim to reach the frame. "Hold," Ephraim said. The word left him before he considered what it might mean to the dog. 9 flinched. For a second, Ephraim thought he would retreat. Instead, the shepherd pressed harder. Ephraim forced the door into place and dropped the lower latch. The broken hinge left a gap along the top, but the wind could no longer throw it open. 9 remained braced against the wood. His chest heaved. Ephraim looked at the scarred neck, the torn ear, the body that had been reduced to bone and obedience. Yet this had not looked like obedience. No whistle had sounded, no chain had tightened, no food waited as payment. The dog had seen the door fail and chosen to hold it. "A bastion," Ephraim said softly. The shepherd's right ear lifted. Ephraim leaned one hand against the table. "That is what you are, a last wall when everything else gives way." The torn left ear twitched. "Bastion!" This time both eyes turned toward him. It might have been the shape of the sound. It might have been coincidence. Ephraim did not care. "Better than 9, he said. "Low standard, but we all begin somewhere." From then on, he did not use the number again. By midday, the sky began to clear. Sunlight spilled across the buried lake with such force that the snow seemed lit from within. Frostbridge reappeared piece by piece. The tops of stone walls, black tree branches, and distant roofs bent beneath white weight. The radio carried word that a rescue team had reached the Western Lake Road. An hour later, Ephraim heard engines beyond the trees. 2 snowmobiles emerged through the drifts, pulling a low rescue sled loaded with blankets and medical supplies. Gwen Talbot rode the first machine. She was short and solidly built, wrapped in a brick-red rescue coat with a mustard-yellow veterinary bag strapped behind her. Gray hair escaped beneath a green knit cap, and even at a distance her expression made clear that she intended to organize everyone in reach. Ephraim opened the front door. Bastion saw the ropes on the sled. His body changed instantly. He tried to stand between Ephraim and the approaching team, but his damaged leg failed. He dragged himself forward anyway, breathing fast, eyes fixed on the equipment. Gwen stopped several yards from the porch and raised one gloved hand to keep the other volunteers back. "No one moves," she said. Bastion gave a low, broken growl. Ephraim could have caught the chain hanging from the collar. He could have pulled the dog away from the doorway. Instead, he stepped outside and sat down in the snow. Cold soaked through his trousers almost immediately. He turned his body sideways, offering no command with his posture. Bastion looked from the strangers to Ephraim. The ropes moved lightly in the wind. The dog trembled. Ephraim said the name once. "Bastion." No order followed, no promise. Only the name and the space to decide what it meant. For a long time the shepherd did not move. Then he lowered his head. One step, a pause, another step, awkward and painful. Bastion crossed the porch and came to Ephraim's side. He did not hide behind him. He did not place himself in front. He stood beside the old man, shoulder touching the faded green coat. Gwen exhaled quietly. Ephraim did not reach for the dog. Not yet. But when Bastion leaned a little more of his weight against him, Ephraim remained exactly where he was. For the first time, the shepherd had followed a human voice without hunger, pulling him, pain driving him, or punishment waiting behind refusal. He had been given a choice, and he had chosen to stay. The rescue sled reached Frostbridge Animal Clinic shortly after noon. By then, the storm had moved east, leaving the town under a blue-white silence so bright that every roof, branch, and snowbank seemed sharpened by light. Plow trucks crawled along Main Street. Men in reflective coats dug out hydrants. Chimney smoke rose straight into the cold air, as if even the wind had exhausted itself. Bastion lay on the padded sled beneath 2 wool blankets. He had tolerated the journey poorly. Every turn of the snowmobile made his body tense. Every time the metal runners struck hidden ice, his ears flattened and his breathing quickened. Yet he had not tried to bite, flee, or drag himself from the sled. He had kept his eyes on Ephraim. That trust felt less like a gift than a responsibility someone had placed carefully in the old man's hands. Frost Bridge Animal Clinic occupied a converted dairy office at the edge of town. The building was plain, with green siding, a low roof, and a wooden sign that had once displayed a cow before someone painted a dog over it. The result looked like an animal with the moral uncertainty of both species. Gwen noticed Ephraim studying it. "Dana refuses to replace the sign," she said. "Sentimental? Cheap. That is more respectable." The clinic door opened before they reached it. Dr. Dana Klein stepped into the cold, wearing navy scrubs beneath a charcoal work coat. She was 47, square-shouldered, with dark hair cut to her jaw and threaded with silver near the temples. Her face was not unkind, but it had the directness of someone who considered wasted time a preventable illness. Her eyes moved first to Bastion, then to Ephraim's wet trousers and stiff right leg. "You rode beside him the whole way?" "Yes. That was not medically necessary." He disagreed. Dana looked at Bastion. "So do most German shepherds." She motioned for the team to bring the sled through the side entrance. The clinic smelled of disinfectant, warm rubber, coffee, and nervous animals. A beagle barked once from a kennel in the back, then fell quiet when Bastion lifted his head. Dana did not take him directly to the examination table. Instead, she cleared the floor of loose equipment, dimmed one overhead light, and asked everyone except Ephraim and Gwen to step out. Bastion's body remained rigid as the blankets were loosened. Dana crouched several feet away. She did not extend a hand. "Does he respond to the name?" "Sometimes." "Does he tolerate the collar?" "No." "Food guarding?" "Not exactly. He waits until I move away." Dana's mouth tightened. "That is worse in a different direction." She placed a shallow dish of water near the wall, then sat on a rolling stool without approaching. Bastion watched her for nearly a minute. Only after Ephraim took a position near the door did the dog lower his head and drink. Dana observed every movement. "He is shifting weight off the right rear leg," she said. "Old injury, probably. Paws are split. He has muscle wasting through the hips and shoulders. We will need blood work before I can safely sedate him." Ephraim glanced at the dog's hollow flanks. "How bad?" Dana adjusted her glasses. "I do not know yet. That is why people pay me to avoid dramatic guessing." Gwen leaned toward Ephraim. "She says that because she enjoys dramatic certainty." "I heard you," Dana said. "I intended you to." The exchange softened the room by a fraction. Even Bastion's breathing slowed. Dana began with the least invasive parts of the examination. She watched him walk 6 uneven steps across the floor. She listened to his heart while Ephraim stood in front of him. She inspected his gums, checked his temperature, and felt gently along the ribs. Bastion endured each contact as though surviving an argument with gravity. When Dana touched the scarred skin beneath his collar, his head snapped around. She froze. Bastion's lips pulled back just enough to reveal his front teeth. Ephraim did not grab him. "Bastion!" The dog's eyes moved to him. Dana withdrew her hand slowly. "Good information," she said. "That did not look good." "It means he warned before escalating. Warnings are useful." People punish growling, then act surprised when a dog stops warning. She took a pair of blunt scissors and, after several minutes of careful work, cut through the old collar instead of trying to slide it over his head. The leather fell open. Bastion recoiled as if something had struck him. For one strange second, he stared at the collar on the floor. Then he stepped backward and exhaled so sharply it sounded almost like a cough. Ephraim understood. The dog had not merely been wearing the collar, he had been carrying the expectation of pain with it. Dana picked up the leather using a gauze pad and placed it in a paper evidence bag. "No one discards this," she said. "Not yet." Beneath the fur, the damage was worse than Ephraim had seen in the cabin. A band of pale scar tissue circled the neck. Several areas were thickened and hairless. One patch near the throat remained inflamed. Dana's expression changed, not into shock, but into concentration sharpened by anger. This was not one event. Ephraim said nothing. She examined the split paw pads, the old fracture, and the scars along Bastion's left side. Some were thin and parallel. Others formed wider ridges where the skin had healed badly. These could come from contact with fencing, Dana said. Some of them, not all. What caused the others? A narrow object, a flexible one, possibly. I will photograph everything before treatment. Gwen's face had gone still. Dana continued without melodrama because facts did not need decoration. His blood pressure is low. He is dehydrated. He has lost a dangerous amount of muscle. The hind leg was fractured months ago and healed at an angle. Surgery might improve it later, but not until he is stronger. Can he recover? Dana looked at Bastion, not Ephraim. He can improve. Recovery is not a door he walks through once. It is a road, and some parts of that road may remain closed. Bastion shifted his front paw. Dana noticed a patch of clipped fur on the inside of the leg. That is unusual. She asked Ephraim to hold a small piece of softened food where Bastion could see it. While he focused on the scent, Dana parted the fur near the inner foreleg. Dark ink appeared beneath the skin. 4 characters. WC-09. Dana stopped moving. Gwen saw the mark and whispered, "Wintercrest." Ephraim looked from the tattoo to the metal tag sealed on the counter. "You know it?" Dana stood. "I know their intake coding." The room seemed to narrow. Wintercrest Canine Academy had occupied 40 acres north of Frostbridge for nearly a decade. Its brochures showed wide training fields, smiling families, polished kennels, and dogs sitting obediently beside men in clean jackets. The academy handled aggression cases, guard dog preparation, boarding, and what its advertisements called total behavioral correction. It sponsored the town's winter parade. Its owner spoke at chamber meetings. Its name appeared on donation plaques at the firehouse and food pantry. Dana removed her gloves. "I treated 2 dogs from Wintercrest last year," she said. "Both came in for injuries described as training accidents." "Did you believe that?" "I believed I did not have enough evidence to claim otherwise." Bastion lowered himself near Ephraim's boots. Dana crossed to the desk and picked up the clinic phone. "What are you doing?" "My job." She reported a found animal, the identifying tattoo, the injuries, and suspected mistreatment. Her voice remained precise. She gave no opinions she could not support. By the time she hung up, Bastion had placed one paw over the floor where the cut collar had lain. Ephraim looked at the paper bag on the counter. What happens now? Animal Control contacts the registered owner. The state investigator reviews the case. Wintercrest may claim him. They will not take him. Dana met his eyes. You do not get to decide that in this room. His jaw tightened. Neither do they. No, that is why we have procedure. Ephraim had spent enough of his life inside systems to know that procedure could protect the weak or hide the powerful, depending on who controlled the paperwork. Dana seemed to read the thought on his face. "If we do this badly," she said, "they call him stolen property, and you an unstable veteran. If we do it cleanly, his injuries become evidence." The word evidence landed harder than Ephraim expected. Bastion was asleep by then, sedated lightly after his blood work showed he could tolerate it. Dana cleaned the wounds, started fluids, and wrapped the damaged paws. The clinic grew quiet. An hour later, a dark green county vehicle pulled into the lot. Elaine Harker entered carrying a weatherproof folder and wearing a gray-green service coat over a pale blue shirt. At 61, she had the upright posture of someone who had spent years walking into rooms where nobody wanted her judgment. Her salt and pepper hair was cut close at the nape, and a thick black fountain pen rested in the outer pocket of her folder. She greeted Dana first, then she looked at Bastion, then Ephraim. "Mr. Dorsey?" "Yes." "You found the dog?" "He found me." Elaine wrote that down without reacting. She asked questions in a steady sequence. Time, location, condition, actions taken, food provided, handling methods, contact with Wintercrest, prior knowledge of the dog. Ephraim answered each one. When he mentioned repairing Wintercrest's generator 3 weeks earlier, Elaine paused. "You saw the same dog there?" "I believe so." "Did you report anything then?" "No." "Why not?" The question had no accusation in its tone, which made it harder. "I saw a thin dog in cold rain. I heard an employee say the dog had to earn water. I left water. I did not see enough to prove what I suspected." Elaine closed the folder halfway. Most cases begin with something someone decided was not enough. Ephraim looked toward Bastion. "Yes." Before Elaine could continue, headlights swept across the front windows. A black SUV stopped outside. Dana's expression hardened. That was fast. Vaughn Reddick entered without removing his gloves. He was tall, broad, without being heavy, and dressed in a black training coat cut close to the body. The coat was clean despite the storm. His silver-blonde hair had been combed straight back, and an old break left his nose slightly crooked. A matte black training whistle hung from a short leather cord at his throat. He saw Bastion. The dog was still groggy from sedation, but the change in him was immediate. His eyes opened fully, his body contracted around itself. Vaughn noticed. He smiled without warmth. "There you are." Ephraim felt Bastion's shoulder press against his boot. Vaughn introduced himself to Elaine as the owner and director of Wintercrest Canine Academy. His voice was measured, almost courteous. He produced registration records, intake reports, liability waivers, and photographs. "His facility designation is WC-09, Vaughn said. "He was surrendered after repeated aggression in 2 private homes. He injured 2 members of my staff and attacked another dog during rehabilitation." Dana held out her hand. "I will need copies." "My attorney can provide them." "Then your attorney may provide them." Vaughn's eyes shifted to Ephraim. "You have done him a kindness, Mr. Dorsey, but this animal is not suited to domestic placement. His name is Bastion." "No," Vaughn said calmly. "His designation is 9. The dog's breathing changed. Ephraim heard it before anyone else, a shallow rhythm accelerating beneath the sedative. Vaughn took 1 step closer. Bastion struggled upright. His bandaged paws slipped, but he forced himself between Vaughn and Ephraim. He did not bark. He trembled so hard the metal edge of the examination table rattled behind him. Vaughn looked at Elaine. "You see? Confrontational positioning, territorial fixation. He places himself between a handler and a perceived challenge." "He is afraid of you," Ephraim said. "Fear and aggression are not opposites." "No," Dana replied. "But one often creates the other." Vaughn ignored her. He turned the whistle once between his fingers. Bastion's head dropped. A low sound formed in his chest. Ephraim moved half a step forward, not to shield the dog from Vaughn, but to let Bastion feel where he was. "Bastion!" The growl stopped. Vaughn's eyes narrowed. Then he smiled again. "You are emotionally involved. That is understandable, given your history." Ephraim went still. "What history?" "Your age, your financial circumstances, the loss of your son." Vaughn spoke as if reciting neutral data. "You are living alone with limited means and a significant orthopedic impairment. That is not an insult. It is a risk assessment." For an instant, Ephraim wanted to cross the room, not because Vaughn had mentioned poverty, because he had spoken Daniel's death like a line on an application form. Elaine closed her folder with a soft snap. "That will be enough." Vaughn turned to her. "I have legal ownership, and I have visible evidence of potential criminal mistreatment." The room became silent. Elaine drew out her fountain pen, uncapped it, and signed the temporary protective hold. "Until this matter is reviewed, Wintercrest will have no direct access to the dog. The clinic will retain custody for medical stabilization." Vaughn's politeness thinned. "You are making a mistake. Then you may appeal it through the proper office." Elaine capped the pen slowly. Vaughn looked once more at Bastion. The dog remained between him and Ephraim, trembling but standing. "This animal will show you what he is," Vaughn said. Then he left. The bell above the clinic door gave one cheerful jingle, badly suited to the moment. Bastion's legs folded. Ephraim knelt beside him but did not touch until the dog leaned against his chest. Elaine watched the contact. "The protective hold keeps Wintercrest from reclaiming him today," she said. "It does not make him yours." "I understand. I am not sure you do." She explained the conditions. The state would inspect Ephraim's cabin. The backyard fence had to be secured. Bastion would require a muzzle in public, veterinary monitoring, and a formal behavior assessment. Ephraim could not visit Wintercrest or confront its staff. Any violation could end the temporary placement. "And if the assessment goes badly?" he asked. Elaine did not soften the answer. "Long-term secured confinement. In the worst case, euthanasia." Ephraim looked at the dog leaning against him. Bastion's eyes were closed, but one bandaged paw rested on Ephraim's boot. "When do you inspect the house?" "Tomorrow." The following morning, Frostbridge arrived at Ephraim's cabin before the inspector did. Josiah Peck came first in an old station wagon with one mismatched door. He was 68, round-faced, blue-eyed, and wrapped in a green and navy plaid coat. An orange knit cap made him visible from halfway across the lake road. Behind him came Gwen, two neighbors, a carpenter from the fire department, and enough tools to suggest either charity or invasion. Ephraim stood on the porch. "No." Josiah climbed out carrying a post-hole digger. "That is not the password." "I did not ask for a crew." "You did ask me to bring the radio back when you finished repairing it." "I have not finished." "Then today is a barter arrangement." Gwen pointed toward the damaged roof. "We fix the fence, hinge, and roof sheet. You repair my snowblower and the station generator." "That is not an even trade." Josiah smiled. "Correct. The generator is worse than the roof." Elaine arrived during the argument. She inspected the water supply, stove, bedroom, fenced yard, and emergency access. She noted the worn floorboards and patched walls, but also the clean blankets, secure food storage, and quiet room prepared for Bastion. The house was poor. It was not unsafe. By sunset, the fence stood straight, the rear door had new hinges, and the loose roof sheet no longer hammered the rafters. Bastion watched through the window from his bed beside the stove. He wore a soft temporary collar instead of leather. Each time the workers passed near the glass, he tensed, then looked toward Ephraim. Ephraim repaired Gwen's snowblower on the porch, while Josiah pretended not to notice that the old man had accepted help. Elaine completed her final page. "The placement is approved conditionally," she said. "Dana remains the supervising veterinarian. You follow every restriction. I will." Elaine looked through the window at Bastion. "This is not about proving he is good." Ephraim frowned. "What is it about?" "Proving what he can choose when he is no longer being hurt." She signed the form. For the first time since Bastion had reached the cabin, Ephraim understood the true shape of the road ahead. They would not win by pretending the dog had no dangerous history. They would have to show that history was not destiny. Inside, Bastion lifted his scarred head when Ephraim opened the door. The number 09 still existed in records on the old tag and beneath the skin of his foreleg. But when Ephraim spoke, he used the name, and Bastion looked up. By the end of the first month, Bastion had gained 9 pounds. Dana Klein called that progress. Ephraim called it proof that the dog had been built from iron, suspicion, and an unreasonable opinion of boiled chicken. Neither description meant Bastion was well. His coat had begun to recover its dark sheen, and the hollows above his hips were less severe. The cracks in his paw pads had closed. The inflammation beneath his old collar was fading into pale skin. But the damage that could be photographed was only the outer edge of what Wintercrest had done. At night, Bastion still slept facing the door. If Ephraim shifted a chain near the woodshed, the dog woke before the first link struck the floor. His body would tighten, his ears flatten, and for several seconds he would seem to forget where he was. A whistle from a distant plow driver once sent him beneath the kitchen table so quickly that he struck his healing shoulder against a chair leg. He stayed there for nearly an hour. Ephraim did not call him out. He sat on the floor nearby and repaired a lantern until Bastion chose to emerge. This had become their work, not commands, choices. Dana brought in an independent behavior consultant named Dr. Miriam Sloan, a lean woman in her early 50s whose gray-streaked hair was usually tied at the nape with an ordinary rubber band. Miriam did not carry a whistle, clicker, or correction tool. She arrived with a canvas pouch of soft treats, a folding stool, and the quiet confidence of someone who did not need an animal to obey immediately in order to feel competent. During their first session, she asked Ephraim to stop saying Bastion's name so often. "He already watches you constantly," she said. "Every time you use his name, he assumes a decision is coming. I thought names were meant to get attention. His attention is not the problem. His freedom to look away is." That sentence stayed with Ephraim. Miriam taught him hand signals that required no sudden motion. An open palm meant pause. 2 fingers lowered toward the floor invited Bastion to settle. A slow turn of the shoulder gave him permission to disengage. There were no sharp corrections, no forced eye contact, no attempt to make the dog perform confidence he did not feel. Some days Bastion managed 10 quiet minutes in the yard. Other days, the sound of a truck door slamming across the lake undid the morning's work. Miriam treated both kinds of day as information. Ephraim found that difficult. He had spent much of his life believing effort should produce measurable results. Miles covered. Distance crossed. Objective reached. Bastion's recovery refused military arithmetic. One afternoon, Ephraim raised 2 fingers for the settle signal. Bastion looked at him, looked at the old blanket near the stove, then walked in the opposite direction and lay beside the pantry. Ephraim frowned. Miriam smiled. "That was excellent." He ignored me. "He understood you and chose another safe place. That counts as success?" "For him, yes." Ephraim considered this with visible suspicion. Miriam packed away her treats. "You are not teaching him to become obedient again. You are teaching him that understanding a person does not erase his right to think." After she left, Ephraim stood in the kitchen for a long time. Then he moved the old blanket beside the pantry. Bastion watched him do it. The dog did not wag. He placed one paw on the blanket. That was enough. While Bastion's world slowly widened, Josiah Peck tried to widen the town's. His radio program usually occupied the hour between morning weather and the noon church announcements. He discussed road closures, missing livestock, broken furnaces, town budgets, and the occasional feud over property lines that had outlived the people who first drew them. One Wednesday, he changed the format. He did not accuse Wintercrest of a crime. He asked a question. "If you sent a dog there," Josiah said into his scratched metal microphone, "what was different when that dog came home?" For 3 days, almost nobody called. A woman phoned to say Wintercrest had saved her marriage by stopping her Labrador from destroying furniture. A man praised Von Reddick's discipline and said most pet owners were too sentimental. One caller accused Josiah of trying to destroy the largest employer north of town. Josiah thanked each of them on air. Then, late on the 4th evening, a woman called without giving her name. Her dog had returned from Wintercrest quieter, she said. At first she had been grateful. Then she realized the dog would not enter the kitchen if anyone stood near the food bowl. Another caller said his shepherd mix began crawling under the bed whenever keys jingled. A retired couple described a dog who urinated whenever the husband put on a long black coat. The calls were brief. Most voices were embarrassed. Some sounded defensive, as if admitting the truth meant admitting they had paid for it. Josiah recorded every account with permission and passed the information to Elaine Harker, not to Ephraim. "Evidence is not gossip wearing boots," Josiah explained. "It needs to know where it is going." Ephraim respected him slightly more after that. He did not say so. The first time Imani Crowell saw Bastion, she was carrying a box of antibiotics through Dana's clinic. She stopped in the hallway. Bastion lay behind a low barrier in the recovery room, his head raised, one torn ear tilted toward the door. He saw Imani before she could turn away. The response was small. His breathing stopped. Imani's hands tightened around the cardboard box. She was 39, tall and spare, with deep brown skin and dark hair braided into narrow rows and tied low behind her neck. Her coat was olive green, plain enough to disappear against a wall. A thin, pale scar crossed her right wrist. Dana looked from Bastion to Imani. "You know him?" "No." The answer came too quickly. Dana did not challenge it. She took the box and said, "The storage room is through there." Imani left without looking back. Bastion remained standing for the rest of the appointment. He would not eat. A week later, Imani returned with another delivery. This time she asked Dana whether the dog had a tattoo. Dana said nothing. Imani looked toward the recovery room. "Inside the left foreleg?" Dana folded her arms. "You told me you did not know him." "I said I did not know that dog. That is not the same answer." Imani's eyes closed briefly. "No," she said, "it is not." She still refused to explain. The third time she came, Dana took her into the office and closed the door. Ephraim waited in the examination room with Bastion. He could hear no words, only the low rhythm of conversation and one sharp scrape of a chair. When Imani emerged, her face looked as if she had spent the last hour standing in cold water. She did not enter the room. "WC09 is not an intake number," she said from the doorway. Ephraim's gaze hardened. "What is it?" Imani looked at Bastion. "An assignment." She left before he could ask more. That word followed him home. Assignment, Not name, not record. Function. 2 days passed before Imani called the cabin. She asked to meet. Ephraim nearly refused. Gwen, who had stopped by with bandage supplies and unsolicited opinions, heard enough of the conversation to understand. "You want the truth," she said after he hung up. "I want someone who had a chance to stop it to explain why she did not." "That may be part of the truth. It is not the part that helps the dog." "No," Gwen said, "but sending her away will not help him either." Imani arrived shortly before dusk. Snow had begun falling lightly, not with the violence of the storm that brought Bastion to the cabin, but in slow, dry flakes that settled on the porch rail and the shoulders of her coat. She carried no bag. Only a small brass whistle in one closed hand. Bastion was lying near the stove when the door opened. He stood before Ephraim could speak. His body became rigid. Imani remained on the threshold. "That whistle stays outside," Ephraim said. She looked down at her fist. Then she placed it on the porch floor and stepped inside. Bastion's lips lifted, not fully. "Enough." Imani stopped near the wall. "I was an assistant trainer," she said. 3 years. Her voice was controlled, but her hands were not. The fingers of her right hand repeatedly pressed into the scar across her wrist. Wintercrest called dogs like him anchors. Large dogs, strong dogs. Ones that reacted when pressure was applied. "What kind of pressure?" Imani swallowed. "Food withheld. Isolation. Slip collars. Sometimes a remote collar. Noise. Tight spaces." Bastion moved 1 step forward. Ephraim did not touch him. Imani continued. "They put the anchors in front of dogs that resisted. Bastion would be behind a barrier at first. We used a whistle and leash tension to make him bark and strike the fence. To frighten the others. Yes. The word barely carried. He did not have to bite them, she said. Most of the time, he only had to be there. A large dog losing control teaches another dog that resistance brings something worse." Ephraim's jaw tightened. "And when he would not do it?" Imani looked at the floor. They made him hungry enough to react faster. Bastion took another step. His tail was low. His ears were back. A tremor passed through his shoulders. Imani did not retreat. "There were incidents," she said. "He pinned 2 dogs. One was cut along the neck. Another tore a pad trying to get away. You filmed it." Wintercrest filmed everything they could use. They started recording after the whistle, after the collar, after the handler crowded him. So the footage shows him attacking. Yes. Not what made him do it. No. The room went very quiet. Ephraim looked at Imani. "What did you do?" Her face changed. Not surprise. Recognition that the question had finally reached the place she had been trying to avoid. "I held the whistle." Bastion's growl began. It was low, unbroken, and so deep Ephraim felt it through the floorboards. Imani slowly lowered herself to her knees. She did not reach toward him. "I am not asking you to forgive me," she whispered. Bastion advanced, 1 step, then another, his head lowered toward her hand. Ephraim could see every old lesson moving through the dog's body. The sound he remembered, the scent, the posture of a person who once controlled what happened next. Imani's breathing became shallow. Still, she did not pull away. Bastion sniffed her fingers. His entire body shook. For one moment, Ephraim thought the dog might lunge. Instead, Bastion turned his head. He walked away and stood beside the far wall, facing the window. The growl stopped. Imani remained kneeling. Tears had gathered in her eyes, but she did not wipe them. "He remembers me." "Yes," Ephraim said. She looked at him. The anger in his face did not lessen. "You watched. I told myself I stayed because I could make it less bad." "Did you?" "Sometimes." "That is a convenient answer. It is also true." Ephraim stepped closer. "How many times did you go home because you needed the paycheck and leave him there?" Imani's chin trembled. "Every time." Gwen, seated near the kitchen table, spoke before Ephraim could continue. "Shame is useful only if it gets up and works." Ephraim turned toward her. "She helped do this." "Yes." "And you want me to make her comfortable?" "No. I want her uncomfortable and useful." Imani rose slowly. "My mother needed dialysis," she said. "Wintercrest's insurance covered what the previous job did not. I told myself I would report them once she was stable, then once the debt was smaller, then once I had another job." "And when did courage become affordable?" Ephraim asked. "It did not." The answer stopped him. Imani looked toward Bastion. "I left 6 months ago. I took nothing with me because I was afraid they would prosecute me for theft. I signed papers. I stayed quiet. Why speak now? Because he survived." Bastion turned one ear toward her, but did not look back. Imani continued, "And because the other dogs are still there." That changed the room. Until then, the story had belonged to Bastion's scars, Ephraim's anger, and Imani's guilt. Now the walls of Wintercrest seemed to rise around all of them. Rows of kennels, numbers instead of names, animals still waiting for the whistle. Imani took a breath. "I will give a statement to Elaine. I will name the staff who handled the anchor program. I will show them which rooms were used." "You may be charged," Ephraim said. "I know." "You may lose your license to work with animals." "I know." "Wintercrest will call you a liar." "I know." Bastion finally looked at her. Imani did not smile. She did not ask him for anything. She walked to the door, picked up the brass whistle from the porch, and held it in her palm as though it weighed far more than metal should. "I kept this because I thought throwing it away would be pretending I never used it." Ephraim looked at the whistle. "What will you do with it?" "Give it to Elaine." Outside, snow continued to fall in gentle layers. Imani left without touching Bastion. The dog watched her cross the yard. Then he moved to Ephraim's side and sat, though his body remained tense. Ephraim rested his hand near the scarred neck but did not touch. For the first time, he understood that saving Bastion would not be enough. The dog had escaped. Others had not. And the people who could help them were not all innocent. Some were frightened. Some were ashamed. Some had been weak when courage was required. The next part of the work would depend on whether those people could do more than regret. It would depend on whether they were willing to stand where Bastion could see them and tell the truth. By the second week of February, Frostbridge had learned how to argue in public. The arguments began in harmless places. At the diner counter, where men in work jackets stirred coffee they had no intention of drinking. At the feed store, where customers lowered their voices whenever someone from Wintercrest entered. At the post office, where one woman accused Josiah Peck of destroying local jobs, and another asked why local jobs required dogs to return home afraid of keys. The snow outside remained clean and bright. Inside the town, everything had become less simple. Wintercrest Canine Academy employed 23 people directly and paid several others through transportation, food supply, repairs, and seasonal boarding contracts. Its clients bought gasoline, ate at restaurants, rented cabins, and paid local veterinarians when something went wrong. Vaughn Reddick understood that better than anyone. He did not defend Wintercrest by speaking about dogs. He spoke about mortgages. He appeared on a regional television program from a studio in Burlington, wearing a dark jacket and the expression of a man forced to explain reason to an emotional crowd. Behind him, the screen showed slow-motion footage of Bastion striking a kennel barrier. Then another clip, Bastion growling over a smaller dog. Then a final image of him pinning an animal to the ground. The footage began too late and ended too early. There was no whistle, no tightening collar, no handler driving him forward. Only the consequence, cleanly separated from the cause. Vaughn folded his hands. "Compassion without judgment is not compassion," he said. "It is negligence. Dangerous animals do not become safe because someone gives them a sympathetic name." At Ephraim's cabin, the television sat on a crate because the old stand had collapsed the previous winter. Bastion lay near the pantry. At the sound of Vaughn's voice, his head came up. Ephraim muted the screen. The dog continued staring at the silent image. Vaughn's mouth moved without sound beneath the caption, "Blind mercy can endanger a community." Ephraim turned off the television. Bastion remained tense for several minutes. Afterward, Ephraim shortened the morning walk. The snow along the lake trail was firm enough to support Bastion's weight, and Dana had approved slightly longer sessions. But Ephraim turned back after 10 minutes. Bastion looked toward the open path. "Enough," Ephraim said. The dog did not resist. He followed home. That should have felt like success. Instead, Ephraim spent the afternoon checking the front gate 3 times, measuring Bastion's food twice, and moving the sleeping blanket closer to the stove because the dog's right leg seemed stiff. When Bastion rose to lie beside the pantry, Ephraim moved the blanket there, too. The dog left the room. Ephraim stood holding the folded blanket and understood, dimly, that care could become another kind of pursuit. Dana said it more clearly the next morning. She was changing the dressing on Bastion's rear paw when Ephraim asked whether the behavior evaluation could be moved forward. Dana did not look up. "No, he is improving. He is gaining weight. He follows hand signals. Sometimes. He controlled himself with Imani. One encounter in a familiar room does not establish reliability." Ephraim folded his arms. There is a deadline. There is always a deadline when institutions become impatient. If the evaluation goes well, Wintercrest loses one of its arguments. Dana finished securing the dressing, then sat back on her heels. "Bastion is not evidence you polish until it reflects well in court. That is not what I am doing." "No?" Her eyes settled on him. "You wake him when he dreams because you want to stop the shaking. You redirect him before he has decided whether he needs help. You shorten walks when he shows discomfort, but you also increase training when someone questions his progress." Ephraim's jaw tightened. "I am keeping him safe." "From what?" "From being taken." Dana stood. "Bastion is not Daniel." The sentence struck with enough force that Ephraim's hands opened at his sides. Dana did not soften it. "You cannot make this dog recover fast enough to prove that love works if a man tries hard enough." Ephraim looked toward Bastion. The dog had lowered his head, watching both of them. "That is not what this is." "Then let him fail sometimes." The room went quiet. Dana removed her gloves. Let him refuse a signal. Let him have a bad morning without turning it into a forecast. Let him be frightened without needing to make you feel useful. Ephraim's face hardened. "You think I am using him." "I think grief can put on the clothes of devotion and fool decent people." For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Bastion stood and moved away from Ephraim. He crossed the room slowly and settled beside Dana's desk. Not beside the door. Not beside the old man. The choice was small. It hurt anyway. Ephraim reached into his coat and closed his hand around Daniel's broken watch. The engraved words pressed into his palm. "Keep showing up." He had always assumed the phrase meant staying close. Perhaps sometimes it meant remaining available without standing over the person one loved. He released the watch. "All right," he said. Dana raised an eyebrow. That sounded painful. It was. Good. Pain occasionally indicates contact with reality. Outside the clinic, Frostbridge continued choosing sides. A group of Wintercrest employees held signs near the town hall. Training is not abuse. Save local jobs. Facts before fear. Across the street, former clients carried photographs of dogs who had returned from Wintercrest changed. One photograph showed a hound sleeping inside an empty bathtub because it no longer felt safe in open rooms. Another showed a shepherd mix wearing no collar because the sound of buckles caused seizures of panic. Neither group looked entirely villainous. A woman holding a Save Local Jobs sign told a reporter that her husband's transport contract paid for his heart medication. A man on the opposite sidewalk admitted he had sent his dog to Wintercrest because the animal frightened his elderly mother. The town did not lack compassion. It lacked a version of justice that cost nothing. 3 days later, Imani Crowell arranged to bring a set of handwritten schedules to Dana. They were not official records. Imani had reconstructed dates, employee shifts, room assignments, and names from memory. Elaine had instructed her to deliver them through Dana's office so they could be copied and formally logged. Imani parked behind the clinic shortly before sunset. Gwen waited near the side entrance with Ephraim and Bastion. Dana had asked Ephraim to bring the dog for a routine weigh-in, and the timing had seemed convenient. It became less convenient when a white utility van entered the lot. The driver was Curtis Vale, a former Wintercrest handler in his early 40s. Ephraim recognized him from one of the Academy's training brochures. Thick neck, shaved head, black work jacket with the Wintercrest mountain emblem on the chest. Curtis got out before Imani reached the clinic door. "You cannot use those," he said. Imani kept walking. "They are my notes. They contain employee information. They contain dates." Curtis moved between her and the entrance. Bastion saw him. His body stiffened. Ephraim shortened the leash but did not pull. Curtis lowered his voice. "You signed an agreement." "I also signed treatment logs that were changed after I signed them." Gwen stepped forward. "This is a clinic parking lot." "Move aside." Curtis looked at her brick-red coat and mustard veterinary bag as if uncertain whether she represented authority or merely intended to hit him with medical supplies. He turned back to Imani. "Give me the phone." "No." He grabbed for it. Imani pulled away. The folder under her arm opened, scattering several pages across the icy pavement. Curtis caught the strap of her shoulder bag. The movement spun her sideways. The edge of the parking lot dropped toward a narrow creek channel hidden beneath snow. Imani's boot broke through the crust, and the bank gave way. She slid down hard. One hand caught a willow branch. The rest of her body struck the ice below. The surface cracked beneath her hip. Bastion lunged. The leash burned through Ephraim's glove before he locked his grip. Curtis stepped backward. Bastion's teeth showed. The sound in his throat was not the trembling warning he had given Vaughn. This was deeper, certain. His body drove forward with enough strength to pull Ephraim 2 steps across the ice. For a heartbeat, the entire parking lot narrowed to the distance between the dog and the man in the black coat. Ephraim could feel Bastion's old training awaken, the clothing, the grip on a struggling person, the sharp movement, all the conditions Wintercrest had once arranged deliberately. Curtis raised an arm. Bastion surged. "Bastion!" Ephraim did not shout. The name carried once across the snow. The dog stopped at the end of the leash. His front paws dug into the packed ice. His jaws remained open. Every muscle strained toward Curtis. But he did not bite. Ephraim loosened his grip by a fraction. "Stay with me." Bastion looked back. Not fully. One amber eye found him. Then the dog shifted sideways and planted himself between Curtis and the broken bank. Gwen was already on her knees, reaching toward Imani. The creek ice had cracked, but not collapsed completely. Imani's left leg had punched through near the edge, and dark water soaked her trousers to the thigh. "Do not pull against the branch," Gwen said. "Let me get under your arm." Ephraim handed Bastion's leash to Dana, who had run from the clinic, then lowered himself onto the bank. His knee flared with pain. Together, he and Gwen pulled Imani up. Curtis had not moved. Bastion stood facing him, growling low, the leash slack in Dana's hand. "You should leave," Dana said. Curtis looked toward the security camera mounted above the pharmacy across the road. His face changed. He got back into the van and drove away. Imani sat on the pavement wrapped in Gwen's emergency blanket, shaking from cold and shock. Her folder lay open in the snow. Bastion turned from the departing van and approached her slowly. Imani did not reach for him. He stopped several feet away. That was all. The camera across the road had recorded most of the incident. Its angle did not show what Curtis said or exactly how Imani lost her footing, but it clearly captured him grabbing her bag, Bastion lunging and the dog stopping before contact. The footage could not prove Wintercrest had ordered intimidation. It proved something else. Under conditions closely resembling those used to provoke him, Bastion had interrupted his own attack. Elaine watched the video twice. "This helps his assessment," she said. "It does not complete it." Ephraim nodded. He had learned not to demand more from a moment than it could honestly give. The next call came to Josiah. Leonard Barlow refused to speak on the station line. He asked to meet in the rear room of the hardware store after closing, where the walls were thick and the owner did not ask questions if someone bought enough screws. Len arrived wearing an olive technical jacket and a yellow headlamp he forgot to remove. He was 58, thin, slightly stooped, with round glasses and a nervous habit of clicking the lamp on and off while thinking. Josiah finally reached over and covered the light with one hand. "You are making the room confess." Len switched it off. "I serviced Wintercrest's security system." Josiah stopped smiling. "For how long?" 4 years. Len produced printed emails. The messages came from Vaughn and 2 senior managers. They requested camera shutdowns in specific kennel corridors during overnight compliance sessions. Some asked for archived footage to be deleted because of supposed storage limitations. "They thought deletion removed everything," Len said. "It did from the user interface, but not the server. An older backup node kept partial copies whenever the main system lost connection. Do you have them?" Len's fingers tightened around the papers. "I know where they are." Josiah did not ask him to hand anything over. He called Elaine. Len retained an attorney before providing access. State investigators obtained the data through a documented process, copied the server image, verified timestamps, and recorded every person who handled it. The recovered footage did not contain one dramatic scene that explained everything. It contained repetition. Dogs kept without food before compliance tests. Handlers tightening slip collars beyond documented limits. Bastion behind a barrier while an employee sounded a whistle and struck the fence with a pole. Vaughn instructing staff to begin official recording only after Bastion reacted. An injured dog carried past the treatment room without an entry being made. A meeting in which Vaughn described bite wounds as expected resistance marks and warned employees that outside veterinary reports would create unnecessary exposure. The evidence was methodical. So was the cruelty. Elaine expanded the investigation. Wintercrest's license remained active under restrictions while the state sought authority for a broader inspection. Vaughn's attorneys challenged the relevance and custody of the archived footage. Nothing ended quickly. Bastion's own future remained separate from the criminal and licensing case. His behavioral evaluation had been scheduled for the following week. At the cabin, Ephraim sat near the stove while snowmelt tapped from the eaves. Bastion lay beside the pantry. The leash rested loose between them. Ephraim did not call him closer. After some time, Bastion rose, crossed the room, and chose a place near the old man's chair. Not touching. Near. Ephraim looked down at him. The town wanted Bastion to become a symbol, a monster, a victim, a warning, a miracle. But the dog was none of those things alone. He was an animal, with a damaged leg, scarred neck, dangerous memories, and the capacity to stop himself at the edge of an old command. The investigation might expose Wintercrest. It could not decide who Bastion would become. That decision would begin in a quiet room under the eyes of strangers, where nobody would care how much Ephraim loved him. They would watch what he chose. And this time, Ephraim knew he could not choose for him. The behavioral assessment took place in a county training building 40 miles south of Frostbridge. It had no connection to Wintercrest, no local donors, and no employees who knew Vaughn Reddick. Elaine Harker had chosen it for exactly those reasons. The building stood beside a frozen fairground under a pale March sky. From the parking lot, it looked more like a warehouse than a place where anyone's future might be decided. Its gray walls held no sign except a small state seal beside the entrance. There were no reporters, no protesters, no one carrying signs about jobs, mercy, danger, or justice. Inside, a row of cameras faced a square testing area marked with yellow tape. 2 doors opened into adjoining rooms, allowing people and animals to enter without crowding one another. A low table held numbered evidence cards, clean leashes, empty food bowls, and written protocols. Everything had been arranged to reduce surprise. That did not make the room safe in Bastion's mind. He entered wearing a basket muzzle and a wide padded harness that placed no pressure on the scarred skin around his neck. His right hind leg remained stiff, and his weight shifted forward each time he crossed the smooth floor. Ephraim walked beside him, but did not hold the primary leash. The lead belonged to Naomi Pierce, the senior technician assigned to the assessment. Naomi was in her mid-30s, compact and calm, with close-cropped brown hair and the careful posture of someone who had learned that confidence around frightened animals should never become arrogance. Dr. Miriam Sloan directed the evaluation from outside the marked square. Dana stood near the monitors. Elaine sat behind a folding table with her fountain pen, a legal pad, and a face that revealed nothing. Ephraim had been instructed not to intervene unless Miriam asked. He had agreed. Agreement had been easier in the cabin. Bastion stopped 3 feet inside the testing area. His eyes moved from Naomi to the cameras, from the doors to the ceiling vents, then back to Ephraim. Miriam made a note. "He is checking you before making decisions," she said. "That is what we trained." "No, it is what he learned to survive." Ephraim did not answer. The first test was simple. A stranger entered through the side door, turned sideways, and stood 10 feet from Bastion without speaking. The stranger was a middle-aged woman in a tan sweater, carrying no objects and making no attempt to touch him. Bastion's ears angled back. He looked at Ephraim. Ephraim kept his hands at his sides. After 20 seconds, Bastion looked away from him and sniffed the floor. Miriam marked the time. The woman took 1 step closer. Bastion stiffened but did not retreat. When she tossed a soft treat several feet to the side rather than toward him, he waited until she had stepped back before eating it. "Recovery time acceptable," Miriam said. Naomi moved them into the next test. A calm older Labrador named June crossed the adjoining room behind a barrier. June walked beside her handler without approaching Bastion. Bastion noticed her immediately. His tail lowered. His shoulders lifted. The old pattern returned in outline, fixation, rigid stance, weight shifting forward. But there was no whistle, No collar tightening. No barrier struck with a pole. June paused, looked once in his direction, then continued walking. Bastion turned his head toward Ephraim. Ephraim did nothing. The dog looked back at June, then chose to sniff the ground. Dana released a breath she had been holding. Miriam did not praise him. She only wrote. The food test came next. Naomi placed a bowl containing a small amount of softened meat on the floor. Bastion waited for permission that no one gave. His eyes moved through the room. Miriam nodded to Naomi. She stepped away. Only then did Bastion eat. Halfway through, Naomi approached with a second bowl in one hand. She did not reach for the food. She dropped a better treat beside it and walked away. Bastion froze when she came near, but he did not guard the bowl. When she returned later with an empty hand and lifted the dish after he had finished, his lips tightened for less than a second. Then he stepped back. Stress response, Dana said. Yes, Miriam replied, but no escalation. The metal door test caused a stronger reaction. A door closed at the far end of the room, not slammed, closed firmly. Bastion flinched as though struck. He spun toward the sound, breathing fast, and backed until the harness line went taut. His gaze found Ephraim instantly. The old man felt the pull of that look. It asked for instruction, for rescue, for permission to stop being afraid. Ephraim wanted to kneel. Instead, he shifted his eyes toward the floor and waited. Bastion's breathing remained uneven for almost a minute. Then he turned away from the door, not toward Ephraim, toward the water bowl. He drank. Miriam glanced at Ephraim. That was better. For him, for both of you. The next object was a loose lead placed on the floor near his forepaws. It had no chain and no slip loop, only soft fabric. Bastion lowered his head, saw it, and recoiled. Naomi stepped back. The leash remained where it was. Nothing followed. No hand tightened it. No voice commanded him forward. After nearly 2 minutes, Bastion approached it on his own, sniffed once, and walked around it. Ephraim understood then that the assessment was not asking whether Bastion had forgotten Wintercrest. It was asking whether memory still owned every choice. The most difficult planned test involved a tall male evaluator in a dark weather coat. The man entered quietly and stopped at the boundary line. Bastion's body changed before the man had fully turned. His ears flattened, his jaw closed. A tremor began in the muscles above his shoulders. The evaluator did not stare at him. He removed his gloves slowly and placed them on the floor. Bastion looked toward Ephraim. This time, Ephraim let his gaze rest on the dog for 1 moment, then turned his shoulder away. Bastion remained standing. The evaluator took 1 step. A low growl formed. Naomi stopped the test. The man backed out. Miriam did not ask Bastion to endure more. He communicated clearly before contact, she said. That matters. Elaine leaned over her notes. He also demonstrated a threat response to clothing alone. Yes? Would you consider that safe? No? The answer hung in the room. Ephraim looked at Miriam. She met his eyes without apology. This evaluation is not designed to produce a hero. Bastion stood near Naomi, still breathing hard. It is designed to tell the truth. They paused for 15 minutes. Dana checked Bastion's heart rate and rear leg. Naomi replaced the water. Ephraim remained outside the marked area. He had never felt farther from the dog. At the cabin, Bastion's fear belonged to a world Ephraim could shape. A quiet room, familiar smells, controlled distances. Here, other people had the right to ask whether love had made the dog safer or merely made one man feel trusted. Ephraim touched the steel watch in his pocket. He did not take it out. The final test was intended to be ordinary. Naomi would guide Bastion across the room while another technician moved lightweight equipment along the wall. The goal was to observe how he recovered from moderate activity after accumulating stress. The second technician, Eric Moss, was a broad man with a gentle voice and years of shelter experience. He moved slowly, carrying a folding visual barrier made of aluminum tubing and fabric. One rubber foot caught on a floor seam. The barrier twisted. A metal support bar struck the concrete with a high ringing crack. The sound was not a whistle, but to Bastion it belonged to the same world. He exploded forward. Naomi lost her footing as the leash snapped tight. Her knee hit the floor and the line slipped from her hand. Bastion was free. June, the Labrador, stood behind the half-open adjoining door. Eric stumbled backward. The folding barrier continued falling toward him, its metal frame turning like a blade of scaffolding. Bastion crossed the room. Dana shouted his name. Miriam raised one hand. "Do not crowd him." The dog did not run toward the open exit. He did not turn toward June. He reached Eric as the barrier came down. Bastion drove his shoulder against the man's legs and barked once. Eric fell sideways. The aluminum frame crashed where he had been standing. For half a second, Bastion stood over him. Then the room changed again. The cameras, the people, the fallen metal, the open door, too many movements. Bastion spun in a tight circle, breath tearing through the muzzle. His claws scraped the floor. When Naomi tried to rise, he growled toward her. She froze. Dana stepped back. Elaine remained seated but stopped writing. Ephraim saw the moment everyone in the room feared. The rescue had ended. Now came the part no sentimental story could erase. Bastion was loose, overstimulated, and capable of hurting someone. Ephraim entered the marked square. Miriam did not stop him. He did not walk directly toward the dog. He sat down 5 yards away, slowly enough that his injured knee almost refused the movement. He turned his body sideways and placed both hands on the floor where Bastion could see them. No leash, no treat, no command to lie down. Bastion. Once. The dog continued circling. His breathing remained fast. A strand of saliva hung against the basket muzzle. His eyes passed over Ephraim, but did not settle. Ephraim did not repeat the name. He remembered Dana's warning. Do not make fear become a forecast. Do not make love become another demand. The room stayed still around them. A minute passed, then another. Bastion stopped moving. He stood with his head low, looking at the fallen barrier. Eric remained on the floor, unhurt except for one scraped palm. He made no attempt to rise. Bastion looked toward June, then toward Naomi, finally toward Ephraim. The old man lowered his eyes. The dog took one step, stopped, took another. No one breathed fluidly enough to be noticed. Bastion crossed the distance and lowered himself in front of Ephraim, not touching him, not hiding, simply choosing the quietest place left in the room. Ephraim waited until the dog's breathing slowed before reaching for the loose lead. The assessment ended there. No one congratulated him. No one called Bastion brave. The report took 3 days. Miriam wrote that Bastion exhibited severe trauma-related responses, heightened sensitivity to specific visual and auditory triggers, and a measurable risk of defensive escalation. He was unsuitable for protection work, crowded public environments, off-leash contact with unfamiliar animals, or handling by inexperienced caretakers. He required long-term behavioral support, controlled exposure, medical management for chronic pain, and periodic reassessment. But the report also documented that Bastion consistently communicated discomfort before escalation when given adequate space. He demonstrated the ability to disengage from other dogs, recover after moderate stress, interrupt a forward attack during the parking lot incident, and seek a familiar human without being physically compelled. Most important, during the accidental equipment failure, he did not pursue the nearest animal or attempt escape. He first moved a person out of danger. Then, while highly aroused, he eventually chose to approach and settle near Ephraim. The conclusion did not declare Bastion harmless. It declared him capable of choices beyond harm. 1 week later, the administrative hearing filled the Frostbridge Municipal Chamber. This time, there were reporters, townspeople, Wintercrest employees, former clients, and attorneys. Bastion did not attend. Miriam had recommended against placing him in a crowded room for symbolic effect. He remained at Dana's clinic with Gwen. Wintercrest's attorney presented the old videos first. On the screen, Bastion struck barriers, growled, pinned another dog, and lunged toward handlers. The attorney described him as unpredictable. Dana described his untreated fracture, chronic hunger, neck injuries, scar patterns, and medical condition when found. Imani testified about the Anchor program. She did not ask for sympathy. She named what she had done, what she had witnessed, and what she had failed to report. Len explained the backup system and the recovered recordings. State investigators authenticated timestamps and documented the evidence process. Former clients spoke of dogs who returned silent, fearful, and altered. Then Elaine stood. She admitted that when she first saw Bastion, she believed permanent confinement might be necessary. The Wintercrest attorney looked pleased. Elaine continued, "Public safety does not require us to pretend this dog carries no risk. It requires us to measure that risk honestly." She described the assessment findings. The law should not punish an animal merely for displaying behaviors humans deliberately conditioned into him. Nor should compassion erase the need for safeguards. Her recommendation was conditional placement with Ephraim. Bastion could not serve as a guard dog. He could not have uncontrolled contact with unfamiliar animals. He would continue behavioral treatment, wear a muzzle in specified public settings, undergo periodic review, and remain with an approved caregiver. The hearing officer reviewed the report and denied Wintercrest's request for euthanasia. A murmur moved through the chamber. Then came the second ruling. Based on the medical records, sworn testimony, recovered footage, and evidence of unreported injuries, Wintercrest's operating license was suspended pending the expanded investigation. No one cheered. The Wintercrest employees in the rear row sat very still. Justice had arrived, carrying relief for some and fear for others. That afternoon, Ephraim collected Bastion from Dana's clinic. They stopped at a fenced field behind the building, a quiet area cleared of other animals. Snow covered the ground beneath a sky turning gold near the hills. Ephraim removed the basket muzzle. He let the lead rest loose in his hand. Bastion stood several feet away. The parking lot was behind him. The tree line stretched to his left. Ephraim stood to his right. For a moment, the dog looked at each path. Then he walked forward, not toward the car, not toward the woods. He came to Ephraim's side and matched the old man's uneven pace across the snow. There was no whistle, no tight leash, no reward waiting in Ephraim's pocket. Only 2 sets of footprints moving in the same direction because neither had forced the other to choose it. The investigation lasted 11 months. Long enough for the snow to melt from Frostbridge, return as rain, disappear into summer grass, and fall again upon the same roofs. Justice did not arrive like a door kicked open. It arrived in envelopes, depositions, veterinary reports, bank notices, insurance reviews, and hearings scheduled for inconvenient Tuesday mornings. Vaughn Reddick was indicted on charges related to animal cruelty, falsified records, licensing violations, and witness intimidation. Several senior employees accepted plea agreements in exchange for testimony. Others insisted they had only followed procedures created above them. The court would decide how much that distinction mattered. The dogs could not wait for the court. Within days of Wintercrest's license suspension, animal control teams began removing them in small groups. Some were transferred to established shelters. Others went to veterinary hospitals, breed-specific rescues, or temporary foster homes with strict handling plans. No single place had enough room. No single dog carried the same damage. One refused to cross doorways. Another attacked its own water bowl whenever it moved. A Mastiff mix slept standing because lying down had once made it vulnerable to handlers. The removal took 3 weeks. Each transport van that left Wintercrest carried animals away from harm, but it also carried away someone's paycheck. The academy had employed cleaners, drivers, office workers, kennel attendants, and maintenance staff in addition to its trainers. Some had witnessed abuse. Some had suspected. Some had known almost nothing beyond their assigned building. Frostbridge argued about them, too. At the diner, one table spoke of complicity. The next spoke of heating bills. Ephraim refused to make enemies of everyone who had drawn a wage from the place. Not knowing is not the same as being innocent, Imani told him one afternoon. No, he said, and being frightened is not the same as being cruel. They were standing outside the locked Wintercrest gate while state workers inventoried equipment inside. Imani wore her olive coat and held a clipboard against the wind. She had spent months giving statements, answering questions, and submitting to the possibility that her own actions would carry consequences. Her former co-workers no longer greeted her in town. A few called her brave. She disliked that nearly as much. I kept thinking there would be a clean line, she said. People who hurt the dogs on one side, people who did not on the other. Lines drawn after the fact are usually straighter. She glanced at him. That sounded wiser than you intended. I object. Bastion stood beside Ephraim wearing his padded harness. He had gained weight, though his right hind leg still lowered his hip when the cold settled in. The pale fur around his muzzle had thickened, making his amber eyes appear darker. He watched the Wintercrest buildings without pulling toward them. That was new. Months earlier, the smell alone had tightened every muscle in his body. Now he could stand near the gate, breathe unevenly for a few moments, and then turn his attention elsewhere. Progress did not erase memory. It gave memory less authority. The property entered foreclosure in early autumn. Wintercrest had borrowed heavily against expansion plans, and Vaughn's legal troubles triggered clauses the academy could no longer satisfy. The bank took possession of the buildings, land, vehicles, and equipment not already held as evidence. For several weeks, rumors moved through Frostbridge faster than facts. A hotel company wanted the site. A security contractor planned to reopen the training program under a different name. The state intended to demolish everything. None were true. The first serious proposal came from Imani. She brought it to Dana's clinic in a folder too thin to contain the size of the idea. A nonprofit rehabilitation center, she said. Dana continued reading a laboratory report. With what money? None yet. An excellent foundation. Imani ignored the remark. Low-cost behavioral support, temporary housing for dogs with trauma histories. Veterinary care for owners who cannot afford private rehabilitation. Dana looked up. And who accepts liability? We create standards. With whom? Elaine. Elaine Harker, seated near the window, removed the cap from her fountain pen. I said I would advise. I did not say I would rescue this proposal from arithmetic. Josiah leaned toward the table. I have a radio audience. You have 32 regular listeners, Dana said. 37. The storm improved our numbers. Len Barlow adjusted his round glasses. I could build a camera system with no blind zones. Everyone looked at him. Len swallowed. Transparent access logs, independent storage, automatic backups. No single administrator able to erase footage. Dana set down the report. Ephraim watched the group begin turning an impossible idea into smaller, more difficult questions. Insurance, zoning, staff credentials, noise restrictions, emergency veterinary arrangements, public oversight. The discussion lasted 2 hours. Bastion slept beneath the table. No one asked Ephraim for an opinion until the end. Josiah nudged his boot. "You have been suspiciously quiet. I was hoping the plan would improve without my contribution. Has it?" "No." Imani folded her hands. "We would need someone on the property at night." Ephraim understood before she continued. "No. You have not heard the terms. I have heard the shape. Part-time caretaker, paid." "No." "A room for overnight shifts." "No." "Access to the workshop." He hesitated. Josiah noticed. "The fortress weakens." Ephraim gave him a flat look. The proposal did not become real that day. It took months of grant applications, private donations, a county rehabilitation fund, and negotiations with the bank. The nonprofit could not afford the entire Wintercrest property, so it purchased only the administrative building, one safe kennel wing, a fenced exercise yard, and the old maintenance barn. The remaining structures stayed closed pending sale or demolition. Dana insisted the new organization begin small. Elaine wrote operating standards stricter than state minimums. Every training room required visible windows and active cameras. No animal could be deprived of food for behavioral compliance. Correction devices capable of causing pain were prohibited. Staff could not work alone during high-risk handling. Len designed the recording system, so footage was copied automatically to 2 independent servers. "Paranoid," Josiah said approvingly. "Redundant," Len corrected. "Paranoia with paperwork." Josiah used the radio station to raise funds. He interviewed former clients, veterinarians, unemployed kennel workers, and people who feared the new center would become another expensive project built from good intentions. He did not silence the criticism. Instead, the board published its budget. That earned more trust than any speech. By early December, the first renovated rooms were ready. The name caused nearly as much argument as the funding. Imani suggested Second Chance Center. Dana said too many places already had that name. Josiah proposed Dogs Deserve Better Than Us. Elaine rejected it before he finished. Ephraim said nothing until Bastion walked through the open yard while light snow fell beyond the fence. "Open Winter Haven," he said. The others turned. He shrugged. It was closed before. Winter is when most people decide what they can survive. No one improved upon it. The sign was painted on reclaimed wood from the old feed shed, "Open Winter Haven." Beneath the name, in smaller letters, "Care Without Fear." Ephraim eventually accepted the caretaker position. The salary was modest. The room provided during overnight shifts held a narrow bed, a desk, a kettle, and one window overlooking the exercise yard. He did not move out of the cabin by Emberglass Lake. A county weatherization program repaired the worst part of the roof and replaced the unsafe heater. Ephraim paid part of the cost through a long repayment plan and covered the rest with his new wages and repair work. Nothing became luxurious. The kitchen cabinet still leaned. The floor still creaked near the stove. The old house remained itself. But on nights when Ephraim returned from Open Winter Haven, the silence no longer met him as an accusation. Bastion was never assigned a formal job. The board refused suggestions that he become a therapy dog, demonstration dog, or symbol used at fundraising events. He wore a small leather tag reading Bastion behind the old metal tag marked 09, but visitors were instructed not to approach unless he initiated contact. His title, Resident Guardian, appeared only on a wooden plaque outside Ephraim's workshop. It was mostly a joke, mostly. Bastion spent his days choosing quiet places, sometimes beneath Ephraim's workbench, sometimes near Dana's treatment room, sometimes alone in the winter sun beside the fence. When unfamiliar dogs arrived, he was never required to meet them. His right to withdraw was treated as seriously as any other treatment plan. One morning, Ephraim brought him into the oldest kennel wing. The state had released that section after the investigation closed its physical evidence phase. Most of the equipment had been removed. The walls were stripped to bare concrete, marked by pale rectangles where signs once hung. One room remained unchanged. A black number had been painted near the door. Bastion stopped at the threshold. His breathing sharpened. Ephraim waited. He had brought a paintbrush and a small wooden board, but he did not enter first. After several minutes, Bastion placed one front paw inside the room, then the other. He walked to the far wall and stood beneath the number. There was no chain, no whistle, no one behind the observation window. Ephraim dipped the brush into green paint. He did not cover 09 completely. Instead, he painted a narrow border around it, preserving the number as part of the wall rather than allowing it to remain the wall's only meaning. Beside it, he mounted the wooden board. Bastion. No longer a number. Bastion watched him work. When Ephraim finished, the dog stood in the room for another moment. Then he turned and walked out. He did not look back. The gesture was smaller than Ephraim had imagined it would be. There was no visible triumph, no sudden release, just an old dog leaving a room because he no longer had to remain inside it. That afternoon, the center received a shepherd mix from a private home in western Vermont. Her name was Maribel, though she did not respond to it. She had been kept on a chain in a garage for years and panicked whenever metal struck concrete. During intake, a kennel assistant accidentally dropped a short safety lead. The chain clip hit the floor. Maribel threw herself against the fence and folded into the corner, teeth flashing at anyone who approached. Staff cleared the yard. Dana instructed everyone to give her distance. Bastion had been lying in a patch of winter sunlight nearly 30 yards away. He raised his head. No one called him. Ephraim stood in the barn doorway, one hand resting against the frame. Bastion rose slowly. He walked toward Maribel, but stopped well outside the distance, where she began barking. He turned his body sideways, lowered himself onto the snow, and looked away. Maribel continued growling. Bastion did nothing. Minutes passed. Snow settled along his black saddle and on the torn edge of his ear. He did not move closer. He did not stare. He offered no correction and demanded no surrender. Eventually, Maribel's growling weakened. She shifted one paw out from beneath her chest. Then another. Near sunset, she crawled forward until only several feet separated them. Bastion remained still. Ephraim watched from the doorway. He understood that Bastion had not become fearless. The sound of the clip had tightened his shoulders too. He had simply learned not to hand his fear to the next creature. That was not healing in the clean way people preferred to describe it. It was discipline gentler than obedience. It was pain refusing to reproduce itself. That evening, Ephraim and Bastion drove back to Emberglass Lake. The cabin windows glowed amber against the snow. Inside, Ephraim lit the stove and hung his green coat beside the door. He took the old tag marked 09 from a small box and placed it on the shelf beside Daniel's photograph. Bastion still wore a duplicate tag preserved for identification. This was the original, the metal bent and scarred from Wintercrest. Daniel smiled from behind the cracked glass. Ephraim sat at the table. For years he had measured his love for his son by the treatments he had purchased, the doctors he had called, and the number of times he refused to accept the end. He had believed failure meant Daniel died. The thought had hardened inside him until it became indistinguishable from loyalty. But Daniel had not asked him to defeat death. In the final weeks, he had asked Ephraim to sit beside the bed without discussing medicine. He had asked for baseball on the radio. Coffee he was not supposed to drink. The story about the fishing trip when Ephraim fell into the lake and blamed the dock. He had asked his father to remain. And Ephraim, so desperate to save him, had spent too many hours searching for somewhere else to go. "I thought love was keeping you here," Ephraim said to the photograph. Bastion rested near his chair. "But you only wanted me to be there." The room did not answer. It did not need to. Ephraim touched the broken watch in his pocket, then placed his hand on the table instead. Bastion rose and came closer. He rested his head on Ephraim's knee. The old man laid one hand behind the torn ear. Bastion did not replace Daniel. Daniel's absence did not become smaller because a dog had entered the house. Nothing lost had been returned. But grief was no longer the only living thing in the room. Outside, snow moved gently over Emberglass Lake, softening the road and covering the roof in clean white. Inside, the number 09 lay beside a photograph. One marked what the world had reduced a living creature to. The other remembered a man no love could keep. Between them sat Ephraim and Bastion, neither repaired, neither alone. The house remained old. The winter remained cold. But the silence had changed. It was no longer empty. It was shared. Sometimes healing does not mean forgetting what happened. It means refusing to let pain decide what happens next. Bastion could not erase his scars, and Ephraim could not bring Daniel home. But both learned that love can remain gentle even after loss, and that staying beside someone may be more powerful than trying to fix what cannot be fixed. In our own lives, we may not be able to change the past, but we can choose what we pass forward. Share in the comments what this story meant to you, and subscribe for more stories about loyalty, courage, and second chances. May peace find you wherever grief has made a home.